Welcome to Change by Design, the podcast where we shine a spotlight on engineering transformation. I'm your host, Chad Jackson, and each week we dive deep with leaders driving real change in the world of engineering. From breaking down barriers to challenging the status quo to fostering cultures of innovation and resilience, our guests share their journeys, lessons learned, and actionable insights to help you become the catalyst for positive change in your organization. Whether you're an engineer, an executive, or simply passionate about making a difference, you're in the right place. Get ready to be inspired, empowered, and equipped to engineer a better future, one change at a time. McKray Jones, welcome to the show.
Chad, I'm really happy to be here. Kim reached out to me and I was excited to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. A good place to start typically in these conversations is to understand kind of how you got here in your career. We all have different paths we walk to kind of get where we are today. And it's good context for the rest of the conversation. So if you could maybe take 5 minutes or so and tell us about that. How did you get to this point in your career?
Sure. So my latest role is technical program manager, deputy director of engineering for an integrated hardware system that focused on radar sensing and tracking, and then kind of expanded out to other sensors from there. So that's my ending point. So we can work backwards from there, or maybe not work backwards, but fill the whole thing in. So I kind of am a person that's just really interested in everything. I love novelty. I love hardware systems. I think in engines and cars. So when we're talking about, systems engineering, especially in software modules, it's hard to think in terms of software for me. So I bring it back to cars all the time. I'm like, how can I make this sound like a carburetor? Airflow and fuel flow and ratios and compression and heat and everything. That's how it all works in my head. So that's what I talk about. So I grew up like wrenching and everything, and it kind of led me towards engineering. I was really bad at being a student, so I ended up going through the Marine Corps as kind of a skip to get my GI Bill and get into university after that. From there, the plan was to be a test pilot in the Navy or the Marines, and I got selected to fly. And by the time everybody in the family figured out what it meant to be a pointy-nosed jet driver, and get all around from Pensacola to Kingston to back to Oceana and everywhere over before you're even part of the fleet. It just didn't make sense at the time for our family. So I ended up staying in the engineering track. Worked in autonomy, a little bit more radar hardware, and then back to autonomy, and then back to radar here. So I've got quite a interesting, breadth and, some decent depth in some areas, mostly in communications and integrated hardware systems. I owe all that to just curiosity and, kind of a craving for novelty and doing interesting new things. And also I really love leadership. I love the human connection part of engineering. I think that it's got some really interesting challenges. I think that there's a vacuum of, high quality leadership in the engineering industry. And I kind of enjoy conversations around that and thinking about how I can be a better leader myself.
Outstanding. Hey, that's great. I mean, first off, thanks for your service. Really appreciate that. And the human aspects of engineering management. I don't think that was on our list of things to cover, but I definitely want to cover it today because I think you're right. It's a space that where we need some more development in the industry, and I think it's pretty crucial.
Yeah, sure. I'm glad to chat about it.
Let's shift gears and talk about the change agent stuff. I'll prompt you with, what is a change agent? How do you define that role? And then we'll kind of go on to the other stuff. What are the success factors for a change agent, and on and on and on. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, cool. So let's shift gears for a second and talk about change agents. I think this is a really crucial aspect of kind of improvement initiatives. So let's start with some basics. In your mind, how would you define a change agent in engineering organizations?
Sure. So when I think of change engine, I think of kind of how I'm seeing the integrated hardware systems economy and industry kind of develop over time, and how pretty much everybody is, leaning towards more highly accelerated development programs and just getting MVPs out to the customer. So when I think about change agent, I'm thinking about that transition from what may have been more of a waterfall led organization where we know the requirements up front and we know the mission and we know exactly what we want to deliver at the end of this long development cycle. Maybe it's 2 or 3 years before we plan on earning revenue on what we're building. Change agent comes in and says, no, we actually need to earn revenue in 6 months, and we need to do it on something that is not nearly as mature as what you imagined in the first place. And we're going to figure out how to do that together. I think a change agent is someone that comes in and instills, some courage and some trust and some curiosity in the team. Because, from what I've seen, nobody really knows how to do this. We've got great ideas. We've got interesting things, but because of IP boundaries and, kind of business intel boundaries and, whether we all want to share, there's competition and stuff. And that all means that a lot of this information about what works and what doesn't work doesn't really get shared outside of businesses. So everybody's kind of figuring it out on their own. It's really exciting, but yeah, change agent, they're about trust. They're about curiosity. They're about moving forward into kind of unknown areas and taking everybody with them in a safe way.
That's good stuff. Excellent. So you mentioned some traits of change agents, trust, communication. Mhm. What are some other success, I guess, traits and characteristics of successful change agents? What do you think is on the short list of skills and capabilities that you have to have if you're going to be successful in this kind of role?
That's a good question. And I think it's maybe a hard one for me to define. But what you have to have is to have that trust. You have to have, some empathy. You have to be able to connect with other people, understand where they're coming from and be able to respond to that. Um, to be a good communicator, you first and foremost have to be a good listener, and you can't do that without some reasonable level of empathy. You have to understand business. Engineering business is unique in the way that money flows. Sometimes it's customer led, IRED. Sometimes it's internal. Sometimes customer led R&D. Sometimes it's internal R&D. But that money flows in a really specific way. And if you're going to keep the business alive, then you have to understand how that works and how we go from a customer's problem to an engineering solution and then on again to revenue. And, that's the most important part of all this, right? Is keeping the business alive. You cannot you can't transition into a new business unless there's going to be a business at the end, right? So I think, empathy, understanding business, technical depth is really important, but I think, for me, I've seen people that have technical depth in one area do great at leadership and engineering teams for another area. And I think what that boils down to is really just understanding the elements of the process,
Yeah.
understanding the requirements gathering definition, understanding how to talk about labor loading and how to build things, and understanding how to talk about that piping back into technical roadmap, the product or technology roadmap and product roadmap. So I'd say understanding humans, understanding kind of high level business flows of engineering, and then also understanding kind of the high level development process because you've been in it for a number of years and made all the mistakes you need to make to be effective as leader.
That's good. Good stuff. There's two things you mentioned there. I'd like to take a side trip into. So you talk a little bit about kind of understanding the business. And what I've seen over the years, and our research shows this. So we've run a bunch of studies, a bunch of survey-based studies. Oftentimes with change initiatives, but more in general, the tools or technologies used in the design and the development cycle are often the least problematic areas. The biggest problems are communicating with executives, developing an ROI, kind of understanding the impact of design
Mhm.
decisions on the business or, the profitability of whatever you're going to be developing. Mm. And it seems like there's been a gap between, with engineering managers and leadership or even staff level engineers and understanding the business impact of their decisions. Have you seen that? I'd love to hear a little color commentary on that if you got a second.
Yeah, and I guess to rewind just a little bit, one of your critical skills as a change agent has got to be communication. If you can't figure out a way to help the people around you, your peers and your, cross-functional people, you're talking to PMO, you're talking to BD, finance, like we all got to be on the same page if we're going to make this new idea turn into something that makes revenue. And if you can't communicate that, meaning you can't say what you mean to say, and also make sure that the people you're talking to hear what you mean to say, then you're not going to be able to be an effective change agent. Now, yeah, of course, I've seen that gap all over the place. In engineering organizations, we have, we have the business development folks. Sometimes they are really great at coming up with ideas. Sometimes they're really great at talking to customers who have the ideas and then bringing those back to the engineering team. But their job's to go out and find that business, right? And then the PMO people who organize the jobs and make sure everybody's on the same track, program management organization or office. Then you got engineers, you got the builders, and then obviously finance. And the gap that I've seen most often is, if we're talking in terms of MBSE or systems engineering, the gap that I see most often is in the problem space. And what that means is we have a customer who has a problem. I'm, most familiar with the defense space. So if I come up with examples, it's going to be from that area. So if we have a customer with a problem, they, have a ground-based autonomous vehicle. It needs to go to some place over open land. We assume no fences and no ditches, and it's got to do so without global navigation support system, or GNSS, right? Our navigation systems, PNT denied, position, navigation, timing, whatever. So that's kind of the top level of the problem space, but that's got to be better defined. We've got to understand kind of where in the world are we, because that'll help us understand which GNSS networks we have. We need to understand the time of day that we're operating, because night operations are a lot different than daytime operations and require different sensors. We need to understand, what level of competency the user is going to have, if any at all. Is this going to be used by a highly trained, SOCOM operator, or is this going to be used by a Lance Corporal in the Marines? Come from the Marine Corps, I'm allowed to talk about how incompetent those guys can be sometimes, right? They're really good at a couple of things. They're really not so good at a couple of other things. And that's okay. We need all types, right?
Yeah.
But defining that problem space is difficult and takes a lot of people, a lot of parties to the conversation. I mean, so you have, the problem is a party to the conversation. The customer and the / end user is a part of the conversation. And sometimes the customer and the end user are separate, right? Like in terms of defense acquisition, the customer is the PMO organization, which is hundreds of people that do the buying. And then the end user is someone out in a battalion somewhere on the ground, getting their boots dirty, trying to figure out how to use the thing you built, right? So sometimes those are separate, but then you've got, the vendor side or the partner side people who are going to be your PMO people, your products people, your BD people, your business executives, and your engineering leaders. All 5 of those parties have to be a part of that conversation too. So now we're up to 9 different parties, including the problem itself, that really have to work together and cleanly communicate and understand each other, and not be doing kingdom building, and not be doing backroom deals, and not be doing any of this other stuff. Because if we're doing any of that on top of bad communication, the problem space isn't going to get defined. And we're going to build something as an engineering group that is not going to serve the end user and is not going to make the business the money it expects to make, because the end user is not going to get their problem solved. So we failed as a team to solve this problem for the end user. And we have earned in response a lack of business.
Yeah. Great insights. Absolutely great insights. Thank you for that. Let's continue talking about change agents and kind of the role. So as we do interviews like this, we run into a lot of people that have been voluntold to kind of take on this change agent role, like they're kind of voluntold to do it. I'm curious. We like to give advice to those folks, potential change agents, to understand when they might be getting into a good situation where they're well supported and they're set up for success, in situations where they're not, and maybe they need to go back and gain some more alignment with their executives, talk about what the challenges are going to be, and negotiate may not be the right term, but try to figure out how they're better set up for success. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the things you might hear in a conversation like that, where it's like, wait a second, there might be some gaps here in alignment? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you think about that?
Sure. So a couple of things. I've been in that position a few times where, we're trying to change, and I've been at, usually the tactical level of a team, leading that change, leading that agency and change and trying to make sure, uh, you know, things are working. And there's a couple of different pieces of that. Some of the language that I listen for is about the actual change. And what does that mean? Are we going to get to a new place at the end? Are we trying to just stay stable and end up in the same place as the end? Um, are we trying to, downsize in some way? Do we want to, reduce the load of the team? Do we want to reduce the size of the team? Do we want to, kind of fracture the team out and spread our cost over different groups? So,
Mm.
an example of, we need to end up in the same place and just stay stable is we're just trying to keep the ship afloat. We're just trying to cross the bridge. We're just trying to get through the woods or get out of the woods or something like that. So that's a situation where, in my experience, the executive leadership can sense that there is something that's, maybe a threat to some stability or a threat
Mhm.
to, the team dynamic or the culture or whatever. They don't know exactly what needs to change, but they know they need someone focused on, you know, surfacing immediate issues and paying attention to what's going on. Um, and that's not terrible, right? We all want better guidance. We all want better leadership. But if you are in a situation where you just got to keep track of, the risky stuff and communicate it out and maybe ask for support when a risky thing comes up, then you can be that person in that situation, just keeping the ship afloat. And there's other, better defined targets. If we are trying to get somewhere, whether that's a bigger, more effective team or a smaller, leaner team, then those roles are usually just pretty fine.
Okay.
Um, excuse me, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. We were talking about kind of the signs that you're in a good situation and set up to succeed
Mhm.
with a change initiative, right?
Yeah, and so for those better defined targets, because the targets are defined, that naturally indicates that, your leadership has a good idea of what they want out of it. The intent is clear. I would say it is risky in terms of, definition of success and product development. We sometimes say, what's the definition of done, right?
Yeah.
Um, and in terms of the definition of done, in that keep the ship afloat or get out of the woods or just cross the bridge scenario, you don't have a good definition of done because oftentimes you don't have. Sometimes you have a clean start, like a senior leader in the engineering organization leaves and finds a better opportunity. Great for them. That's a clear start to the situation. But then, it could be that for some time after that, you don't really have a clear ending to that situation because your culture is changing. There's going to be a lot of turnover. You're trying to find the right leader replacement for that person. And so in that situation, you might not be very well set up for success unless you have some really great leadership support. You have some really great, ad hoc support from your leaders that says, hey, I don't know exactly what you want from me. Can you please help me? And if you can hear that every single week and be okay, you're good to go. But if you have leaders that really don't like that question because it makes them uncomfortable, makes them feel like you're not tracking what needs to go on, then you might be in hot water as far as defining what success is.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good insight. Thank you. Mhm. There's a couple things you said here that caught my attention. You know, early on, you talked about empathy, right? So empathy and kind of understanding what people are trying to accomplish. And then separately in your response just a minute ago, you talked about sometimes you just need to have the status quo. Sometimes you just need stability. Maybe it's not a big fundamental change. Mm, And this got me thinking more and more that sometimes change agents are trying to think of a better term, but almost zealots, right? They have a hammer and everything's a nail, and they want to go deploy PLM or a new change process or MBSE, no matter what. And sometimes, what I've learned is, hey, that's not always the right thing to do. It really depends on the context of what's going on in your organization. Any thoughts there? I mean, how do you navigate that kind of thing?
Well, for example, if we're rolling out a new tool set or a new development process, like if I am going from managing my requirement traceability and my test matrices and everything in like a SharePoint Excel doc, it's fine. It's useful. Everybody can access it at pretty much any time from their phones, from their computers, whatever. That's good. But if we want to have a really nice picture and traceability, change traceability, and also connectivity to our existing, MBSE model, then we probably want to run this in Cameo, right? Um, I haven't seen that work when it just, we force it out. We implement it right away. If, I'm a hammer and everything's a nail, uh, I've seen that be attempted a few different times, and I think that it's not an effective approach all the time because it seems to me that, if you have an engineering team that's trying to deliver and they're trying to change their tool set at the same time, changing from kind of classic systems engineering where everything's managed in a table, whether it's doors or something simple that you build in Excel, um, you're going from that to model-based systems engineering, which is not just the developmental workflow. It is also a complete change of language for the engineering team, for the systems engineering team, and the rest of the engineers who have to talk to the systems engineering team to get design guidance, but
Yeah.
also every other stakeholder in the company. Your product team doesn't know what a block development diagram is. Your executive team doesn't know what a systems requirement document is. They just don't. And if you try and force MBSE in, you say, today we're using Cameo, we're never going to go back to Excel-based RTM. Well, you've just created a lot of friction for the rest of the business that you're not going to get out of for probably a year. Not because people can't understand what you're saying, but because every time you go back to a meeting, people are going to ask for those legacy documents. And sometimes they're going to get them. And that means you have to spend extra time doing old work that you should have just thought about doing in the first place. So, and this happens with every tool change, whether, if you're switching from, oh, shoot, I got no examples at the top of my head right now. But
Yeah.
but you're just adopting new tools. So, it's always, a lot of back and forth. And if you think of it like an impulse and damping curve in a control plot, then, the bigger the impulse, the bigger damping is required to bring that back down to zero. And if you're under damped, you're just going to be oscillating back and forth. And that energy is just going to be totally unmanaged for a much longer period of time.
Mhm.
So that's, if there's an engineering way to think about change management, it's in Bodie plots and controls. I'll tell you that.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great analogy. I absolutely love that. Yeah, it's a good parallel in so many ways. Let's okay, so let's talk about systems engineering for a little bit. And I'd like to separate that out away from MBSE, which is a way to go execute it. But let's talk about system engineering first. Can you speak a little bit to say how long your organization has had system engineering practices in place? I think this is good context.
Uh, well, how long they've had systems engineering practices in place. So I've been in a couple different organizations and they all use different systems engineering in a different way. Not only did they use it in a different way, but the senior engineering team and the senior leaders in the business think engineering, systems engineering is a different thing. So if I can make the assumption that systems engineering is architecture development, requirements management and refinement and communication, then, and not what sometimes ends up being, we build a thing and then we're documented it. Sometimes people call that systems engineering, and I don't think that's what it is. Um, but, real design guidance from the architecture level linking up to requirements, like user level, user stories or user level requirements, then how long have they been doing systems engineering? I think the answer to that is either the age of the company, if it's less than 10 years, or, couldn't be longer than 10 years. I think that, I've only worked for a couple of teams that were less than like 50 people. And those are the only places we really didn't do systems engineering because we were able to sit in the same room and understand the intent of what we were designing and really have really super tight communication and kind of all think with the same brain for enough time that we could build what we wanted to build together. But for any team that, needs to work remotely or not work on the same thing, work on more than one project at once,
Mhm.
which is pretty much any team that's making money. You have to do systems engineering. How long? Uh, you know, Probably 6 years for my most recent position.
Yeah.
That was the age of the company though.
Yeah. Okay. So right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, I'd love to hear a little bit about how the system engineering role has been staffed. Are you finding that you're able to hire in systems engineers, and that's kind of how you get the knowledge to go execute the process? Are you having to take people from other domains and bring them over and kind of cross train them? Um, or are you finding people right out of college or university that kind of fit into the role? I'd love to hear a little bit about how that works. Yeah, Kim? Gotcha. Yes. All is fine. Okay. All right. We can jump back into that. I'll restate it for you, McCray. So I'm interested in how you all are filling these system engineering roles. So are you bringing people in from the outside with system engineering experience? Are you cross training people from other domains? Are you hiring in from college or university with that kind of degree? How does that work? Because, system engineers are different.
They're a little different.
They're a little different. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and it really depends on kind of what we need out of the role at the time, right? Sometimes we need junior systems engineers that are focused on like tool development in Python or MATLAB and, kind of managing existing tool sets, whether that's in Excel or whether that's in Doors or whether that's in Cameo. um, or kind of helping implement. Right, if we have an architecture then we need to build on a system in the shop, we're going to prototype it. I want the systems engineer, the junior systems engineer in there looking at the architecture, understanding what's going on, understanding why we need to have these VLANs on this managed switch or whatever, and making sure that that actually gets implemented, because that person's going to go and do the confluence documentation that keeps the rest of the team on track so they don't lose the static IPs 6 months down the road and get completely stalled at a test site. Sure, that's never happened to anybody ever before. Mhm. So if I need, tool development, right? Just any kind of tool development, then I'm gonna need someone that knows how to do systems engineering.
Yeah.
Can't be someone right out of college. It might be able to be like a software engineer or some kind of test engineer that knows how to write LabVIEW tools and Python tools and MATLAB tools. Then, I'm going to see if I can pull parallel first. It's always nice to hire someone that you already know and they already have trust in.
Mhm.
But other than that, I'm going to look for, a tester, an integrator, or an existing systems person kind of mid-level. And
Yeah.
then sometimes we need really specialized knowledge and skill, right? So that's, you know, digital transformation means we got to find somebody that knows how to do MBSE. If the DoD is telling me that they're not going to award me any contracts that don't come with MBSE deliverables, I guess I'm an MBSE company now, right? So I've got to find someone that knows how to do that and can, is content in their position, because some people aren't, right? Sitting in front of a
Yeah.
Cameo screen all day,
Yeah.
being content, building those tools out, taking the whole product suite for the company, the whole solution suite for the company, finding a way to fit it into the model, linking it up to all the existing stories and like the product requirements. So that person's got to have, you know, circumspect knowledge and really understand exactly what's going to into MBSE and how to build it. And also be comfortable doing that. And also not really have a lot of aspirational goals of, moving into leadership or running a team or whatever. That's, it's a kind of a unique person. There are people that do that. And I've been fortunate to find a couple, but that hiring pipeline is going to take you a couple of months. It's not going to be easy to find that person. So it really depends on the needs of the role. But depending on what you need, you find them from all different levels.
Really interesting. Yeah. Thanks for that insight. I appreciate that. Yeah, they're definitely unique, and that's not a you don't fill that position in a week. is is what I've heard again and again and again. Um, before we dive a little deeper into MBSE, something I've noticed in this conversation that keeps coming up is I'm hearing a lot of software development terms being interjected in the way you describe your development process. And you're a hardware focused guy, right? Even at systems level. Yeah. But I hear you talk about, an MVP, product management terms, user stories, confluence. Um, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about kind of the reconciliation between software worlds and hardware worlds and how you do you mesh them together? Do they live apart and then you just integrate them towards the end? Like, talk to me a little bit about that because that's a huge challenge.
It is a huge challenge, and that's a challenge I was faced with at a role working for an autonomous robot company. We got guidance from the executive team. Everybody's, we're going to turn off cost point tracking as much as we can. All labor, all tasking, all programming, it's all going to be tracked in Jira. So we had to figure out how to use it. And right away, we were like, well, not only does it take a long time to build something out of hardware, we need to be really mindful of these changes because they impact a lot of people and they impact a lot of stuff. So
Yeah.
um, at that time in my career, I had an opportunity to kind of from scratch develop a product development process and figure out how to, we were kind of whiteboarding the product roadmap at Canva, and then we did our sprint retrospectives and reviews in Canva again because it's a really nice collab tool when everybody's remote. Then our technology roadmap went into Jira and at the highest level initiatives or whatever we called it, right?
Yeah.
And then we broke an initiative down to different projects and demos and sprints and tasks and so forth. And that was just kind of where we started. We built the framework before we really understood what the framework needed to be in. Now, that's not a very good approach to building something technical. You don't want to understand, you don't want to build the framework before you understand the requirements the framework has to accept. But I think in engineering development, and honestly, like the driver of all of this is really just it's the customer and the industry.
Yeah.
Hardware development is going faster than it's ever gone before.
Yeah.
We have to get these products out so quickly and at a maturity level that nobody's comfortable with. And that's just the way it is today. If you want to work, that's what you got to do. Unfortunately, it's taken me a little longer than I'd like to accept that and to learn that. But I think that I was lucky to have the benefit of a really great mentor at this position I just mentioned, autonomous trucking. He came from from automotive industry. He was a Ford employee and a Dodge employee for a couple of years, and he had like formal capital P product management training. So learning from him about user stories, about minimum viable products, about product roadmaps, about product, backlog management and all this stuff,
Mhm.
like he introduced me to all that framework, and my brain was tuned into like DWIA, which I don't know if you're familiar with that. Defense Acquisition Workforce Initiative Act. It is
Oh,
yeah, it's the systems engineering V by legislation, right? So that's literally what it is, so that worked really well for me because it's a very systematic way to think and develop and build things, and it's great. But you get to the real world, especially now things are evolving. We've got B2X, Parsons, Sierra Nevada, Anduril, right? They're all making hardware faster than anybody thought was possible, which is really cool and impressive. But you can't think of the systems engineering review when you're doing this. Everything is iterative now. Everything, including software, including systems, including hardware. All of our engineering is iterative, including, in fact, the processes that we develop within.
yeah.
Everything is iterative. Everything's an MVP all the time. And so when I talk about hardware development, that's what I'm talking about. Now, in using words like MVP and product and user story and things, yes, that applies to hardware and software and systems and process and everything because it has to, because that's the way the industry is today, whether we like it or not. If you've got a couple of $1 billion and you want to start a new engineering company that moves slower and more mindfully and deliver something, maybe you'll be successful, but probably you're going to have to be willing to like lose a bunch of money on that gamble and before you make money. And
Mhm.
great for you if you have that capability and that risk capacity. Most of us don't, right?
Yeah.
But hardware and systems especially are hard to fit into Agile and into Scrum or whatever, because you can't prototype a hardware thing in 2 weeks like you can software. You just can't. Because if we're gonna, I mean, we got 3D printing. That's fabulous. All right. So in the 3D printing case, we can design a fixture. We can print it, even if it's a third-party printer. You know, we want to send the the file to a SLS printer in Ohio and get it back in 7 business days. That's great. Well, what if it needs to be a machine part? What if it needs to be a weld nut? What if it needs to be cast?
Mhm.
Now we're talking about 6, 8, 14, 16-week lead times on a single prototype. That's mechanical stuff. All right. If we get into computer hardware, now we're talking about even bigger changes.
Mhm.
If we want to go from Wind River FPGA to Xilinx, well, not only are we talking about a mechanical form factor, the bolt pattern on the PCB or the CCA has to change, but we're also talking about a new bit stream. We're
Mhm.
also talking about a new connector stack between the CPU and the FPGA. We're talking about new power requirements. We're talking about new thermal requirements. So hardware sits at the fundamental core of the whole product. If you're going to change a hardware requirement or a hardware design, you need to do so very mindfully and understand the impacts of everything you do. You're not going to do that these days without a solid systems engineer and a solid MBSE model,
Mhm.
because that's one of the cool things about MBSE is you can click through the architecture and say, yeah, if I take this Xilinx FPGA and I change to this new form factor SoC, so I can get, this many more cycles or this many more gates or whatever, then I can understand that change pretty easily. I can understand that, yeah, great, I get 18 more GPIO, but I also have to handle 50 more watts of thermals, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, so these hardware changes, whether it's a mechanical thing or whether it's a complex computer hardware architecture, like they have technical implications and technical risks that fragment out and fracture out into the engineering team and have an enormous effect on technical, program, cost, risk across the board. And if you don't have a solid, systems engineering team tracking that and understanding the impact of those decisions, you will cost your program so much money and it'll be almost untrackable. It'll be almost unauditable. And the decision you make to do that kind of recklessly is going to it's going to have a big impact, and you might not like the impact.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, that's a great perspective. And a really good segue to go a little bit deeper into MBSE, right? And talk about how that works. Um, Switching over from kind of DBSE, uh, oh, wait one second. Hey, Kim? How long? All right, good. By the way, McKray, this is you're the first guest we're using on Squadcast. So some of it is new to us as well. So pardon our experimentations and discovery.
If you love the Squadcast based on this first thing, we could do a little promo reel, help them out a little bit. We make it work.
We can do that. Yeah. Oh no, don't worry, don't worry. So I was saying, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about MBSE. That's a really good segue to kind of dive into that. Obviously, you can use a DBSE, a document-based system engineering approach if you want to. Um, Is the trigger to use MBSE as opposed to a DBSE approach? Is it really all about complexity? Like if you're dealing with much more complex stuff, documents, spreadsheets, you really can't manage it and track it. Um, is that really the main trigger for why you should flip to MBSE?
I don't think it could be. I mean, we built ISS, we built SR-71, we built all these complex systems without MBSE, right? So
Hmm.
I think that, if you ask Kelly Johnson, he'd say, no, that can't be the trigger because I did all that with 3 notebooks and 500 of the smartest guys in California.
Okay. All right.
So what is the trigger? I can't tell you. exactly what the trigger is. I think that there's a lot of promise in MBSE.
Yeah.
I think that there is a lot of opportunity for acceleration, opportunity for clarity, and opportunity for really effective communication across functions, all the way from executive team down to FSR, and getting out to the end user and the customer. There's a lot of opportunity there for clarity on complexity, for turning something that's complex into something that's understandable by everybody. And I guess that's a big difference between, ISS and SR71 is the only the only thing that needed to be less complex is the UI, right? You didn't need to, as the end user, you didn't need to deeply understand what was going on somewhere else in the airplane, because we had another guy for that. We had an airplane mechanic for that. But
Mhm.
you know, with MBSE, we can get every single stakeholder in and help them understand at whatever level they're comfortable with the complexity of the system and the nuance of the system that they're working with. I think some of it's customer driven because of that promise, because of that opportunity. For example, last year DoD gave a directive, said, for these programs, we're not gonna consider your RFI is not gonna come in unless it includes an MBSE component.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Good. Good. Yeah. Mhm. So if I think about, let's back up for 1 second. So if I'm advocating for an MBSE approach within my organization, um, and I go to my executives, what should I tell them in terms of like how the benefit manifests in the business? Is it getting things done on time? Is it reducing development costs? Is it being able to develop a system that they had never been able to develop before? They never won a contract before. Can you talk me through maybe some of the ways that might be quantifiable in terms of that benefit?
yeah, absolutely, and that's our complexity can come back to bite us down the road in terms of when we're making user documentation, when we are providing documentation artifacts to third parties, right? If we're trying to go for a 5000.2 certification or some kind of FAA or FMBSS or whatever system you're building, there's a safety certification or a build certification group that can do that third party for you. It could be something as simple as environmental test certification for a mechanical system,
Yeah.
but all of those requirements, all of that requirements linking, all of that documentation has to live somewhere. And if you're doing document-based systems engineering, then you've got, a many documents repo to sift through to get that. MBSE gives you access to that, a lot more elegantly, depending on, whether you're good enough at, building the tool or not. But the thing that really you can quantify down the road is that, the friction to communication, to understanding complexity, to this downstream engineering stuff that has to happen. Safety certification is expensive and complex, and one of the reasons it is so is because of just the piles and piles of documentation that have to be generated, managed, reviewed, certified just to get to that safety certification. Safety certification isn't about redesigning the product, right? It's about making sure the thing you designed has traceability to requirements, has test artifacts, has, test data, that everything is connected and everything is linked together formally so that we can look and see, and, God forbid there's a safety issue down the road, we can look back to our engineering process and see the decision that made that safety thing become, realized, and, correct it for for future engineers and future end users. That's the whole point. Um, so I think, reducing that friction is a huge opportunity for model-based systems engineering. It's a hard sell though, because, like we were just talking about, hardware development, everything is becoming iterative and becoming faster. The expectation that timelines shrink and, cost stays the same and quality stays the same is, sometimes it's unrealistic, but that expectation is really making it difficult to communicate in terms of longevity and reduce friction down the road, because
Mm.
um, the mindset seems to be shifting to a place of, we're not thinking 5 years down the road. We're not thinking 10 years down the road. We're thinking 2 years down the road. And, I'm not really concerned about, saving 100 hours of time 3 years down the road, because I only care about 2 years down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Especially in aerospace defense, obviously everything's being compressed down. And I think those startups, those new entrants into the industry has really changed expectations there, which,
Mhm.
is good in some ways, challenging in other ways. But either way, you got to deal with it, right? So let's talk a little bit about signs where MBSE, an organization might be ready for MBSE, or where you might want to say, whoa, hold up, let's pause. We need to get some stuff in place first. So, if you look at any traits and characteristics of a team, organization from a process perspective, a personnel perspective, a technology perspective, what will be some red flags for you to say, hold up, you got to get some foundational stuff here in place first.
So if we think about what MBSE is at the bottom line, it's a communication and organization tool. We have really great ideas. We have, really great people that can build those ideas, and we need something to collect all that information together. We need to put the problem space and the solution space in the same tool so that we can do estimates, so that we can do architectures, so that we can communicate all this. Um, if you don't need that, you don't need MBSE. If your organization is so small and so tight that everybody's on this, like I was describing about earlier, if you can sit in the same room and work on the same thing until it's done, you might not need MBSE. You might need like just an email that says, we need a user manual and we need a bug log and a bug backlog, like a change log and a bug backlog. And that's it. That's the documentation we need. And by the way, comment your code, right? If that's all you need and you're building a phone app or whatever, like you don't need MBSE. But if you have a cross-functional organization, even at the most mature stage where you've got 10 engineers and they're working on, 3 projects each, and that the workload that, context switching happens on at least, a basis of every 2 or 3 days, they can work on one project then you probably need, well, you need something to manage that. You need something to manage the context switching between projects. You need something to manage the definition of the projects technically and programmatically. And you need something to manage the technical definition of the solution, right? And so you have to have that. It's my opinion that if there's an opportunity to start with MBSE, then you should just do that right at the beginning. We've got tools like, I'm not trying to promote anything, but Capella is really great because it's got Arcadia built right into it. It's got the roadmap just right there. Just boom, 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 boom. This is how and you get on, a LLM to understand the language, and you're in good business because all you got to do is follow the steps, and your guys, junior as they are, done in a week. So, you start right there and you get that documentation done. And that's, as soon as you need to organize between different projects, between different programs, and just understand things at a higher level, man, especially if you need third-party certification, you should just start using MBSE right away. Because if
Yeah.
you need systems engineering at all, the easiest way to get through that is just to do MBSE, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, good advice. Absolutely. Um, let's shift back. Let's change gears again. Let's talk about engineering management, kind of the human side of things, the soft skills. Um, we talked about a little bit about that before. But, there's this trope of the traditional engineer that is highly technical, doesn't have those soft skills, but increasingly engineers have to kind of work with people from other functional departments to collaborate, to get on the same page, to get aligned. Mm. Can you talk a little bit about maybe how the profile of an engineer has changed from, could go a decade back to now? I'd love to get your perspective, especially with the influence software has had on hardware development.
Mhm. So now I guess I missed the question there. So what are we asking?
Yeah. So the question is, how has the profile of a successful engineer changed maybe in the last decade? The old trope is that engineers didn't have a lot of soft skills. They didn't have a lot of communication, empathy, EQ types of skills. Has that changed until now? Is it different today? What do you think?
I think it has, and I think it has to. 10 years ago, I think the assumption that, any given senior engineer or principal engineer not having the soft skills that you would expect out of a senior today, I think that's pretty true. I remember a really well-respected engineer, just screaming at another engineer inside of a meeting, just open mouth, just open, like pointing and just like, and I asked around, I was like, we just let him do that? We just scream here? And everybody's like, well, that's just the way he is. We just deal with it. And I was like,
Wow.
okay, all right, that's interesting. And I think today it's a lot different. I think that, you know, just as just general society, especially, the millennial generation and then Gen Z behind us, is they're really a lot more tuned into the human aspect of work in general,
Yeah.
to the human aspect of daily life. I see a lot more of that, just kind of, more like a deeper human connection. And it's more important to people to have more of a human connection. And I see that kind of percolates into sales conversations, into PMO conversations, and sometimes it's not always healthy, right? Sometimes people be looking for signals that aren't even there, and they'll get offended by stuff. And that's another great reason to have this EQ, right? Is to kind of navigate that dynamic situation where you've got a customer and they feel offended, and you've got to be like, I'm really sorry you feel that way. That's not what I meant at all. Let's kind
Right.
of bring it back a little bit. And if we need to take a few minutes off the call, that's great. The profiling engineer, I think, includes all that these days, the successful engineer. I think that if you cannot, communicate openly about, who you are and what you're doing in the world and what you need, then, you might have some learning to do. I think that's a pretty important part of working in the world today.
Mhm. Good. Hey, that's a really good perspective, and I appreciate you sharing that. Mm. I think that covers all the ground we needed to today. McKray, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's good to get insights from someone actually doing the real work, kind of on the front line, right? So thank you so much for your time.
Been a pleasure to have a conversation with you. I appreciate your time, Chad.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed the conversation, make sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send us a message, leave a review, or join the discussion on our social media pages. Until next time, take care and talk soon.